Now for our guest speaker. I have known Adam Brandon for quite a few years, and many of you did not know that he's a Northeast Ohio boy, and we're glad to have him here tonight. His father's here with him, and we appreciate his dad picking him up from the airport and getting him here because he flew in from D.C. today. But since the beginning of the Tea Party movement, and boy, it's hard to believe, folks, but this is our 5th annual dinner. Whoever thought we'd last more than a couple of years, right? They said we'd go away, and we haven't gone anywhere. And part of the reason we haven't gone anywhere is because of people like Adam Brandon and the people at Freedom Works who have supported our efforts, who've been there to provide resources that we did not have, that we needed to fight the fight, to give us some of the intelligence that we needed to know what the fight was about and where the key, senators or House members or where the fight needed to be waged. And I can tell you this, that whenever I've needed Adam and I've made that phone call, he's answered. Whenever I've needed Freedom Works, they've been there for me. We've met together in D.C. We've met in other locations, and they've just been a great player with us and with all the Tea Parties in the state of Ohio, particularly. And it's because of the hard work that Adam puts in. And believe me, they work very, very hard. He and Matt have an incredible schedule. So we are very pleased to have with us tonight Adam Brandon, the Executive Director of Freedom Works. And I'd like to give him a warm round of applause from the Portage County Tea Party. Adam, come on up. Your cup of tea, I hope. Not coffee, tea. All right, there's plenty of room up there. Jump up there.
I tend to be one of the more informal speakers you'll ever have. So if you have any questions at all, just raise your hand. I love when I get interrupted while we're talking. And yes, if you can't hear me, let me know, and I'll try and speak closer. And throughout when I'm speaking here, I'd like to ask a few questions. And those of you who ask the questions, I brought a gift bag of random stuff I grabbed when I was walking out of the office today. So we got a couple of Matt Kibbe autographed books, C.L. Bryant's movie, a coffee mug, and some T-shirts. So the first thing I wanted to start with is something that, Tom's talking about how many years we've been at this, and it's amazing how much has changed and how much isn't. A friend of mine sent me this just a little while ago. The University of Washington sent an email out to all their alumni of a new book that one of their professors is writing. And it asked the question 4 separate times, quote, "Is the Tea Party like the Ku Klux Klan?" Because this guy just wrote a book, Change They Can't Believe In, The Tea Party and Reactionary Politics in Contemporary America. I look at this crowd. I mean, you guys look like the neighbors that I grew up with. It is absurd that we are still in this place in America where you guys are doing all this hard work, and that's what people are still saying about us. But I wanted to start with that because this is actually going to be a very optimistic talk that I want to give, because I'm actually looking at 2014, and this is where I really want to start answering some questions about because we're in our planning processes right now at Freedom Works. So I'd love to be able to get your input right now on what you want us to work on, and if you have any questions for us. But I was thinking also on the plane today, going back to the early days, that first march on Washington. I mean, were any of you guys there? I remember that morning very well because one of my colleagues went on television and said, we're going to have 50,000 people there. And I was all upset. I'm like, we have no idea. Like, I'm so happy with 10,000 people. And then what happened? Pennsylvania Avenue, 7 lanes wide. And I remember a couple days before, a Park Service person called us and there was a problem shutting down a couple lanes. And I'm like, don't worry about it. We'll just use the sidewalk. You guys ended up filling 7 lanes of Pennsylvania Avenue for 3 hours. So back then, Nancy Pelosi said you guys didn't exist, and I'm proud to stand here tonight because you guys are still not existing. So this is a homecoming for me. I grew up not too far away from here. I spent a lot of time in the Cuyahoga Valley. I went to Walsh Jesuit. And I do have, my mother was supposed to be here as well, but she's taking care of my sick nephews. But I actually have my dad in the audience, which is the first for me and really cool. because for all the times speaking around the country, I've never actually had a family member, so I'm a little nervous. I really don't want to embarrass the Brandon family here. So let me start just with that. My family story, because this is a story I never tell, but I think this will probably speak to everyone here. My mother's family, they came to the southern part of the state basically as pioneers. I guess you could call them economic refugees. They came to Akron to work for Goodyear. My father's family came from the Czech Republic. One of the stories is that the husband ran in the front door and said, "You got to get out of here. You got to go to Cleveland. There's some family there. The police are after me." And he went out the back door, and I guess the police came in the front door a few minutes later. Never saw him again. His family packed up and moved here. Isn't that all of our stories? And I think about that, and it's like, so they all got here, and what was it? It was a bunch of trees in the middle of a wilderness, and they made one of the world's most prosperous economic areas that the world has ever seen out of basically nothing. And then, the Wright brothers quote, "What does it take to be successful? You got to work hard and be born in Ohio." And then you fast forward to where we are today, and I am a die-hard Browns fan, and I go to the Browns backers bar every Sunday in D.C. when I'm home. When I wasn't at that Pittsburgh game a few weeks ago, almost freezing to death. But what really upsets me is when I see how young and energetic that crowd is at the Browns backers bar, and I'm thinking, man, if 10% of you guys would stay back in Ohio, the economy would be a lot better. And I keep hearing how good the economy is. Do you guys see it? So here's my first trivia question, by the way. You heard about these job numbers today that came out that were so rosy? What percentage of those were government jobs?
41.
Man. Do you want a T-shirt? Do you want a book? What do you want?
Just throw one.
There you go. Thank you.
I'll stay on.
41% of all the new jobs that were created were actually government jobs. How sustainable is that? And then I was also listening to Nancy Pelosi comment on these numbers, and she was talking about the need to extend unemployment insurance indefinitely because it's such a job creator. She said this.
Among other things.
So one thing I was raised hearing about and growing up here and learning about when we were making steel and making rubber and everything, the private sector creates jobs. The private sector creates wealth. The government is more or less a parasite that kind of rides that wealth creation. And when the parasite gets too big, the host dies. And we look at what's happening down the road in Detroit. How far is that from us? It's amazing how in just a couple generations, the amount of wealth that you can squander. Now remember, I did say this is going to be an optimistic thing, right? So I'm just starting with those things that I want to say something about my since I'm thinking about my heritage and why I'm even in this movement. I learned a lot of my values and the reason I'm here from my father, and absolutely not from my mother. So, so I just got to be honest. So since she's not here, I just want to tell you guys, my dad is a small business owner. He's a dentist. And when I grew up, I remember I don't think I've ever woken up before him. He's always in his office at 5:30 in the morning. He would come home at 8, 9 o'clock at night. There were usually about 5, 6 employees that they absolutely depended on his office's employment to make things work. And I got to watch that, but I also got to listen to him come home and say, well, you know what? Last year, OSHA said I needed the x-ray here. This year, they tell me I needed to move it there. And if I move it the requisite 3 inches, it might bankrupt us. And then next year, they're going to want me to move it over there, right? And I'm thinking, so this is the job creators. These are these backbones of the community. So I'm watching this as I was growing up. And then when in a really formidable time, in my opinions, I saw something else happen. And that was one of his employees named Tina, who had 4th graders maybe. She got a really nasty cancer. And the cancer was so bad, the drug company or the hospital basically told her, here's some pain pills. We're going to make it a lot easier, go home and die. So my father had some of his hygienists come together and research, and they found an experimental treatment in the Netherlands. And he had an event like this, very similar to this, and they raised enough money to send this woman overseas to do this treatment that she was able to live for about 8 more years. She is now passed. But she got to see those girls go through high school. And that's when I learned the power of the community and the power of the small business owner to really make an impact. So that's always stuck with me, Dad. I really appreciate you doing that. And that's when I start hearing these jobs numbers and I start hearing all these policies coming out of D.C. That's what's at stake. Because I'm not sure who's going to take my dad's place when he retires. Because with Obamacare, can you even have a small independent practice? Or are you going to be forced into a big hospital? And I think about that woman's kids, who if she worked at the big hospital without that community, is she going to get those years to kind of raise her kids up through an important time? That's the real cost of Obamacare. That's the real cost of all this government growth. And I'm going to get back to that in just a second here. And I also want to say I have another friend here, Dave Zupan. On a lighter note, Dave is an activist from Avon Lake in Cleveland who is always sending me pictures when he's going door to door and everything. And there's been a few times, especially when I've been exhausted and beaten up, that he sent me pictures of him being exhausted and beaten up going door to door. And I'm like, damn straight. That's what we're doing. That's why we keep it rolling. And he might, if you recognize him, you recognize him from a video. He used to work putting up yard signs for Mandel in the last election, and Sherrod Brown's guys were always following him around with cameras. And he walked up to one of those guys and said, "Is that camera on?" And they're like, "Yeah." "Is Sherrod Brown going to see this?" And they kind of got a little nervous. And he got right in the camera and said, "Sherrod Brown, go F yourself." And which ended up going viral. And then I heard that later Josh Mandel then said, when he took one look at the video and turned to someone, was like, "Huh, guy must be from Cleveland." Yep, he was. So this is why I'm optimistic. Because in my heart, I know we're right. And there's a number I always give. This is going to be another trivia question for you. This is the big scary number for me. And this encapsulates, like when you were being called KKK members by the University of Washington. To me, this is the reason we're all in this room right now. Let's say interest rates go back to the historical average of 5.7%. I mean, how crazy is that? How much more will that cost us each year just to service the debt?
Too much.
800 billion.
It's this is a smart table up here. Yeah. It's approximately somewhere, depending on how the Fed works it, between $800 billion and $1 trillion. You're adding a 1/4 of the current government spend just to service the debt that we are racking up right now. And think what that means. We got to borrow that money somewhere, or we're going to have to cut it somewhere. But if people think that the sequester cuts are bad now, can you imagine when overnight we've got to go find $800 billion in cuts? What do you want for your prize? You want a T-shirt?
I want you to find the first lady that raises her hand in the audience and give it to her.
There we go. All right, so going back to why I'm optimistic. When this movement started, a lot of people used to come up to me and they'd always say, "Where is our next Ronald Reagan? When are we going to have another Ronald Reagan?" And I actually realized the other day, I haven't heard that question in a couple years. And I think that's the reason I'm optimistic, is I think it's kind of settled into us that there isn't some savior going to be jumping in to save our country. It's everyone in this room working together and coming together. It's the only thing that's going to work. That's it. So that's something that's getting me optimistic. Another thing that's getting me optimistic. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead a little bit here. And that is that the old model is breaking. Have you noticed that we've started to get attacked lately? All right. Does everyone know who Steve LaTourette is? Does everyone see what Steve LaTourette is doing with his Republican Main Street Partnership? Yeah. Dedicated to going after and destroying Tea Parties? He got his first major donor. $150,000. Who was it?
Obama?
The Laborers Union. They're going after us and throwing that, getting back to why I'm optimistic, because we're winning. And the thing that's really scaring them the most is that when I look back on the last couple of years and all the things that we have done, everything that is important in all our victories, we have been outspent. Every one of these races, whether it's Mike Lee, whether it's Ted Cruz, and these guys have just been blown away and they won. Why is that? Well, to me, it's real simple. And we're doing an experiment right now. We're actually trying to find the numbers. And what we are finding, and we're going to release some of these findings early next year, is that for every additional vote, for less than $5, door-to-door, yard signs, and live phone calls can add a new vote for a candidate for less than $5. One piece of it takes, for that same moving of a vote, it takes $92 in mail. Television, they can't even calculate. So the old model, right, was if you're Steve LaTourette, you go get on your committee, you go play by the rules, you raise all kinds of PAC money, you then go and spend all kinds of money on television. It doesn't work anymore because people in this room are going to be going door to door, they're going to be calling their neighbors, they're going to be putting up yard signs.
If they don't get stolen again.
If they don't get stolen. But it's going to, what I'm seeing happening is you're taking the importance of that money out of politics. Now, you still need money, but action and activity is infinitely more valuable and more impactful than money. So, yeah, make sure you give Tom and the Portage Tea Party all the money you can get tonight. That's very important. But you could take on those big fights against those $1 million funded candidates and win as long as you're pounding the pavement and out in the streets. So I just wanted to shift a little bit here to speak on a couple of issues. And this is another thing that we were doing last night that I just want to fill you in on. This is very interesting. We did a focus group with center-left Democrats to test Obamacare. And because we've done a lot of our testing with center and center-right, of course. And this was the first time we got really into, after all this debacle, what are your center-left neighbors thinking about? And one of the most striking things is, remember, they're in a room and we're in a glass panel behind the room and we're literally like yelling, but they can't see us because we're hearing some of the things. And when we start bringing facts out to them, they didn't believe them. 5 million people lost their health insurance. No, that's impossible. That's Fox News right-wing nonsense. So when you brought the facts weren't working. And then we started drilling down deeper to try and figure out, well, why are you guys still supporting this? And it was just always trying to do something to help people. That's it. That's the only reason people were supporting Obamacare. It had nothing to do with what it's actually doing. When we start talking more about the people who are losing, the people who are, how rates are going to go up, the needle just moved. And so what that's telling me for 2014, what we do a really crummy job of is telling the stories. And that's why I was telling the story about my father's hygienist, who there's an impact. Obamacare is going to have an impact on all these folks. If we start talking about what these actual economic impacts and what these healthcare impacts are going to be, it is amazing to watch that needle move. This is making me very optimistic for 2014. And one thing we tried to get them to talk about, and we laid all the traps, and no one mentioned once, was the shutdown. They forgot all about it. So for all of this, that the shutdown's going to... They didn't even mention it once. So look into next year. We've got... in 2014, I know just on the southern part of Ohio borders Kentucky, there is going to be a major primary going on there. Looking around in your own state, I know there's going to be a governor's race and whatnot. There is a lot for us to do. There is a lot of places to go. I want to start taking some questions, but I just want to start wrapping up by saying we're going to get attacked. It's going to be much more vicious from the conservative side this year than the left. Just be prepared for that. Don't get distracted by the presidential race in 2016. If we do the work we need to do in 2014, we will kind of control our own destiny going into the race in 2014. Remember, when you're getting attacked, it's because we're winning and making a difference. I know sometimes it rings hollow when you pick up a paper and you see how you feel the hate pouring on you, but it is because we're making a difference. I wanted to thank everyone again for letting me come and speak, and I would love to get some questions from everyone. And as always, let FreedomWorks know how we can help you guys. Because we view ourselves as a service center. That's what we do. If you need anything, questions, you need policy, just let us know. We're easy to find. So with that, I'd love to open up for a few questions. Yes, sir.
Could you explain the FreedomWorks University?
Oh, FreedomWorks U. We just rolled this out. So FreedomWorks U we used to have a program when we were a lot smaller where we would bring people in and we would do a 2-day boot camp. And day 1 would be grassroots activism training, and day 2 would be policy training. And one of the things we've also learned is if you don't have a good, solid understanding of the facts, you're not going to be a very good, articulate spokesperson for the movement. You got to understand the basics. And so this was the key part of our training. There's just no way now. We have 6 million people in our network. That may have worked when we had 20,000 people in our network. But with 6 million people, we needed to take our offline training and put them online so that people can, when they're sitting at home, when they come, after Dave Zupan spent all day going door to door and he wants more for some reason, you're not tired, you can go to FreedomWorks University and you can pick your different courses. And we've actually had a few guest lecturers like Peter Schiff talking about economics, Judge Napolitano talking about the Constitution, and the goal is going to be that as time goes on, we're doing this is kind of the beta test right now to see how it works, but it's actually going to be, you're going to be able to get a badge if you roll through all the courses. So there's a lot of stuff that's planned in the future. And if there's stuff that we're not covering, and we're going to try and do activism and economics and constitutional issues, let us know. Yes, sir.
Is there any possibility of partnering with Hillsdale College?
That gets into strange C3, C4, all of those legal type issues. I would say probably a third of my staff went to Hillsdale. And we do a lot of events over there at Hillsdale. So there's a lot of overlap and whatnot. But for a lot of our projects, and one thing I didn't mention, but this whole new attack on C4s that we're seeing coming out of D.C., is everyone familiar with what's going on here? And for those of you who are not, the solution to the Tea Party abuse scandals from the IRS is to institutionalize it. And new rules are being pushed out, which they're going to redefine what social welfare is. Saving future generations from a trampled constitution and massive debt is definitely social welfare. However, the interpretation is probably going to be if you're not growing government, you're not social welfare. With the idea, they don't want to see this happen. Actually, the American Enterprise Institute calculated that because of IRS abuse, between 5 and 8 million votes did not show up in the last election. Obama won by less than 5. So we got to be careful with all the C3, C4, and where that's going in. You have a question, sir? Yes.
That's not a question, it's an observation. This is not the Democratic Party of my parents or me when I belonged to the Union. This party has been hijacked. You cannot go after the Democrats because as soon as you go after them, they get tight-lipped and they get upset. To me, you need to go after the Democrats by telling them their party has been hijacked by these progressive, socialist world order. You don't go after the Democratic Party, you go after the people that's taking them over to divide them. Because a lot of these Democrats are totally upset now what's going on.
Right.
You need to give them a reason to go after them. They need to purge their party of these people. And I wish the talk show host would start saying this, and everybody else would start saying this, where they would get out and get out and get out, just like they do, so people would start thinking of this before the next election. Because they've got to be purged.
My father and I on the drive down here were talking about how isn't it amazing that Hillary Clinton kind of seems like a moderate. I mean, like, what has happened to the Democratic Party that's like, when you're talking about candidates in the next race, that's how far left and progressive it has gotten. One of the sad things I find is, and this is something I talk with Tom about all the time, is unfortunately it seems like I spend most of the time fighting people within my own side, my own party. The most vicious wars are always civil wars. And on the Democratic side, I think the progressives have cleaned house. They seem to have won.
Yeah.
And that's, and one of my things that I also think about quite a bit is when we're successful, we kind of we stop the growth of government. Like Reagan kind of stopped the growth of government. But we've never successfully rolled it back. And when I look at I think a lot of it's because of the victories of the progressives in the Democratic Party. They're not letting any rollback happen. And that's why that's why this room has to stay together. Because if we don't start rolling back Obamacare, if we don't start rolling back some of these NSA abuses, who knows what things are going to look like.
One more thing.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, we're getting beat up now.
Mm-hmm.
But my thing is, the Heritage Foundation read the Affordable Care Act as soon as they got their hands on it.
Yep.
The Tea Party have told these people for how many years now what this whole thing was about. So why don't we have people start beating our chest and saying, hey, who lied to you? We didn't lie to you. We've been telling you the truth for how many years now? Did the media lie to you? Did this party lie to you? Who lied to you?
We tested this last night in our focus group. And because that's one thing, I actually sent an email out from my name. If you're on FreedomWorks' list, you probably got an email from me today saying that something along the lines of, liars and those who tell lies. Because what is with this Obama thing with his uncle? Is this not the craziest thing ever? Speaking of liars, like, I've never met this guy, but I've just raised by him. I mean, yeah, I've lived with him for 20 years. Well, but I think when it comes back to something I said earlier, we always talk from facts, and the other side tends to argue from emotion. Well, calling someone a liar, that's really emotional. And they do a very good job. And I always feel bad saying, like, well, I'll come out and say, well, you have your facts wrong. Well, maybe we need to be better at saying, look, you're lying. You're distorting the truth. And what's happening to this focus group, like, I couldn't believe it when this person went up and said, how does it change your opinion on Obamacare that 5 million people lost their insurance? And they're like, that is not true. They were so vociferous in their belief that that wasn't true. I mean, that's just fact. Yes?
Okay, how do you approach, on our side, we end up with this where people are trying to argue their point. And they start with saying, you're wrong, you're a liar, you're a whatever. And the other person shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recommend to us that you start this conversation? I had a conversation with a guy who says, I'm not against unions, but I am anti the union steward. Because the union steward is a guy who negotiates between the company and the union, and he only cares about keeping his job, and both sides lose and he wins. And so I use that. But how do we get that message across without antagonizing them and poking the bear, just knowing that they're going to show up?
And that's really hard to do because if you're motivated and you study politics and you're interested in it, like you want to get out there and push it. Earlier this year when the monuments were shut down, like literally in 24 hours, we put together a very quick little rally, and about 5,000 people showed up, where we went and we cleaned up the monuments. And we made it very clear and asked everyone to wear their Tea Party shirts and their Don't Tread on Me flags and everything as we went. We had so much of a positive feedback from that, from people who saw that. They just flooded our emails. Another thing that I noticed is my boss often will do things like Bill Maher with HBO, and he'll go on shows that there's no reason for him to be on. And just the fact that he's on those shows, it's amazing how many people come back and say, like, wow, I still disagree with you, but I really appreciate what you said. I'm kind of putting that together, and I think the best way to do that is you are living in your community. I think if people know you helped your neighbor find their lost dog, you helped push the car out of the ditch, and then when politics slightly comes up, you come in at like, well, this is what I believe. it is so much more powerful. And going back to those numbers, why does door-to-door work? Well, if your next-door neighbors, who hopefully like you, see you and you come in a very polite way, like, this is an important election to me, I was hoping you'd consider that these candidates. That does more because Americans statistically trust each other. We have lost almost all trust in our universities, almost all trust in our media, almost all trust in our government. But man, we still hold faith for our neighbors. And that's something else that came out in the focus group, is that people wanted Obamacare because they wanted to feel like they were taking care of people who couldn't take care of themselves. And it's like, that's it. That's really, that's the difference between them being with us and not. It's just they feel that the other side cares. And it gets frustrating because you're like, we're going to help more people and deliver higher quality of medicine through our reforms. I think the reason our message isn't getting across is we're still seen as too combative. Let's go in the back there a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
What is your opinion on the states talking about forming constitutional conventions?
The compacts, correct? Yeah, we've been. We've talked about this a lot. Now, remember, it's very there's so many good issues out there. Sometimes it's like the buffet. You've got to figure out what we as an institution at FreedomWorks can work on. And because something else that's coming up that's very similar, I'm sure you guys are starting to hear about this, the common law grand juries. That is very interesting. But they're some of the people are talking to us about the same thing. The fear is that if you start having these constitutional compacts, that people are going to get in and radically rewrite the Constitution. I don't think that's a real fear at all. I think that personally, I'm looking at some of these ideas of doing health care compacts where you literally ban 5 states together and virtually nullify, say, Obamacare. I haven't seen a real logical reason why that wouldn't work. The question is, can we really get these different states together? And
I was thinking of it more in terms of creating constitutional amendments, such as term limits.
That's how you start the process. And like I said, what you'll be attacked for is like the minute you start touching the Constitution, all kinds of stuff can start coming up. I think if this process is that this is the way the Constitution designed itself to be amended. So I think we should use that. Yes, sir.
Yes. Quite a few of us like writing articles in the paper.
Yep.
And writing an article, you expose yourself. I don't believe in writing an article without signing your name to the bottom of it.
Yep.
So I signed my name.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm a bit leery right now about who to write about.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're being attacked by our own governor.
Yep.
Yet because of this constitutional possibility, we would like to maintain a Republican governor in the state. Because we need, 38 of them or so?
Mm-hmm.
Pulling it through if we do go that far. I'm disgusted with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so I just simply stopped writing for a while till I figure out who I'm going to put my sights on. The crosshairs are turned off. The gun's in the closet. And I'm trying to figure out who to take aim at next with what.
All right, this is something I was also reflecting on. We're going to take a long way to get there. When I was in high school, I started volunteering for the Summit County Republican Party. And there was a way that you volunteered. You would go downtown, they would give you a list of people to call, and you were given the races that you would work on. Does that sound familiar? And you'd look at them, you have no idea what their values are, you have no idea really what they stand for, but it's like you're just kind of hoping because they're Republican they might be okay. You fast forward to today, if I was the same kid trying to volunteer, you could go online and get very involved in Kentucky against Mitch McConnell. You could go online and get very involved down in Texas supporting Ted Cruz. And so I guess my answer to you would be there's 2 things that you could do, and I know this because I've worked to help get some of these guys elected, and then I've gotten to know them in the legislative process. Ted Cruz got the crap beat out of him. I mean, you want to talk about a very nasty bullying. What the Senate did to him and to Mike Lee was nasty. Hearing from you guys from Ohio makes all the difference in the world, because sometimes that's what those guys have. They go home, they sit there, they're exhausted, and if they have 100 letters or they have 100 emails of positive thanking them from across the country, you have no idea what that does to support those good guys when you find them. And conversely, I always know this too, don't stop those letters to the editor. Those things are powerful when it comes to offices. They read those. A letter to the editor is more powerful than a call or an email. It's probably the most, outside of an office visit, it's the most powerful thing you guys can do to advance legislation.
Last question.
Yeah.
Last question in the back. John, Lionel.
No, not at all. I'm just saying what happens if it goes back. I mean, we're living in a world where the idea is we can afford to rack up. The consensus in Washington is we can rack up all of this debt because it's free. And no one's thinking about when you just look at if things go back to average, what that cost will do. And so what I would rather do, I mean, that distorted the system. These low interest rates distort the housing market. It distorts everything. Free student loans distort education. It makes it actually more expensive. So when the market sets the rate, you're not going to get the bubbles. You get the bubbles when the government interferes and distorts the rates. The problem that we're facing is because the government's distorted the rate for so long, when the bill comes due, wow. The only way I see out of it is if they deflate the currency or inflate the currency out of the problem, which means everyone who's saved up, I mean, you better go to the Horseshoe downtown Cleveland, I guess.
All right.
All right.
Adam, I want to thank you for coming and talking. Hopefully he'll be able to stay for a few minutes while we're doing the silent auction. You can maybe talk with him. He didn't get to eat, so hopefully he'll get to eat some desserts. He was giving out some gifts and things, and we have a few things we'd like to give to Adam as well. His nephews couldn't make it, so maybe he can share some of this with his nephews. But we want to give you a Portage County Tea Party cap. Okay, so you can take that back to the office, hang it on the wall. It's not a Browns cap or an Indians cap, but it will help. And there's a T-shirt here from Portage County that you can have for one of the kids, I think. Okay,
perfect.
And then for your car, we got our magnet stickers and our T stickers. All right, so we got that. So
and you can have the coffee mug that I drank out of this morning.
There we go.
I lost it before I got on the airplane. I promise
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, bud.
Thank you.
All right, Adam Brandon, folks. Thank you for taking the trip, and I hope you get to spend some time with the family.
Here, I'm going to leave all of this for you.
Oh, great.
You can dish it out as much as
we can. All right, awesome. We'll put it in the silent auction. All right, great. All right, thank you very much. Again, Adam Brandon.